Hello everyone, I'm Mr. Furlong, and today we're going to take a look at some properties of biological molecules. Today we're going to take a look at the structure of the four organic compounds. Now one thing you have to keep in mind as we go through this video is that structure is always related to function. And sometimes the structure can be slightly different, which might give a slightly different function, but that could be similar. So for instance, your two eyes aren't exactly the same. There are some small differences between them. So the structure is a little bit different, but their function, they both do the same thing. They both are used to allow us to see. Or if you take a look at your two hands, might be a little bit easier than looking at your eyes right now, they're not exactly the same, but they can do the same functions. Well, the same is true for organic molecules. So let's start with nucleotides. In a nucleotide, there are three basic parts. We have a phosphate group that's attached, and I'm just going to put the letter P in here to represent that. That is attached to a sugar molecule, and that is bonded to a base of some type. This is a nitrogenous base. There are two different types of sugars found in a nucleotide. You can have either deoxyribose, which is found in DNA, or ribose, which is found in RNA. There are 5 different types of bases. There's adenine, cytosine, guanine, which is found in both RNA and DNA. There's thymine, which is found in just DNA, uracil, which is found in RNA. Now, how they arrange themselves, at least in DNA, the phosphate will attach to the sugar from one nucleotide to the next, forming the backbone, and then the bases will form hydrogen bonds to make that double helical shape. In RNA, we just have a single shape. Now, there are these differences between DNA and RNA, but they both can do some of the same things, like store some hereditary information. Let's take a look at amino acids. There is a centralized carbon on each amino acid that's attached to a hydrogen. Now, on one side of the centralized carbon, there is an NH2 group. This is what's called an amine group. And on the other side is a C with a OOH. This is called carboxylic acid, or acid. And this is how amino acids get their name, because they have an amino group and they have an acid group. Now, what's different among the 20 amino acids is this R group, or what's referred to as the variable group. So let's take a look at these variable groups. What you see in green represent that R, or that variable group. Notice showing, for instance, in this case, the C, the centralized carbon, and the H. We have the acid group and the amine group. What's shown in green is that variable group. So every area in green is different. Now, this does give the amino acids some unique properties. So for instance, these particular amino acids are hydrophobic. These amino acids are hydrophilic. We have some special amino acids that can be ionic, so they have a charge. Some of these hydrophilic can be basic, others can be acidic in nature. That all these amino acids are different from one another, and they have some different properties, but yet they all tend to have a similar function in terms of what they do. If we take a look at carbohydrates, here we see 5 different types of monosaccharides: glucose, fructose, galactose, deoxyribose, and ribose. Now, they're all made up of carbons, hydrogens, and oxygens. Notice the shape of them, though. We can see a nice different shape between the glucose and the fructose. But if you take a look at the glucose and the galactose, there is a small difference. Notice how we have an OH group here and the hydrogen here. On the galactose, the OH group is here and the hydrogen is there. That makes this a different molecule. Again, similar in shape, they have similar functions, but they are two different molecules. Now, sometimes we can see carbohydrates in what's known as a straight chain form. So here's a couple different types of glucose molecules as well, not in its ring structure. So keep in mind that carbohydrates can take either one of these shapes, but they tend to have the same function. And then we have lipids. Lipids are made up of carbons, hydrogens, and oxygen. We have the glycerol portion, and then we have the fatty acid portions. Now notice, if you take a look at these fatty acids, they look different from one another. And that difference comes right here. There is a double covalent bond between these carbon atoms. Notice it takes on a slightly different shape. But it also gives different properties to this. So for instance, when we only have single bonds between the carbon atoms, like in these first two, that is referred to as a saturated fatty acid. And saturated fatty acids typically are going to be solid at room temperature. If we have at least one double bond, there can be more, but if we have at least one double bond, then this is referred to as an unsaturated fatty acid. And these are typically going to be liquid at room temperature. Another type of lipid is called a phospholipid. And a phospholipid only has two fatty acids because it has a phosphate group attached to that glycerol backbone. And this is what we see making up cell membranes. We'll talk more about cell membranes later on. But notice there is also, we see these words hydrophilic and hydrophobic. Hydrophilic literally means water loving. Hydro, water, philis is loving. Hydrophobic means water fearing. And because it takes on these properties, the phospholipids will arrange themselves into two layers, forming that lipid bilayer membrane. So there's the structure of some of these organic compounds, and I'll see you in class.